Okay, thank you, Kim. And the first thing you all need to do is say a prayer that when I touch share screen, I get to the PowerPoint. So just a minute. Okay, I think I did it thanks to some training last week.
Good. Can everyone see that? Give a thumbs up.
Yes.
Great. Terrific.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm taking this from the top, and Kim, in case I lose touch with timing, keep keep me tuned into timing. Somehow, I don't think this is going to take an hour and a half, um, but people say, Mary, you tend to talk a lot, so we'll see what I do. So I'm trying to watch time, and all of you help me. My stated hoped for outcomes. I hope that this is a time for all of us to reflect on our experience as board members or trustees. What I've learned over the last few years is some boards are very clear they want to be called board members. Others say, no, it's in our bylaws, we are trustees. So I honor both terms. Um, really want to recognize the very important role a board plays in any institution, and in this case, we're talking about our schools, and the importance of competent board members. I have heard people at times say, and what competency do you think I bring? However, we often surprise ourselves. I'd like to look at what I call the three essential elements for a successful board and a board member. Look at the core responsibilities and habits of an excellent board. Look at the traps that we could very easily fall into, especially if we're unaware of them. I find a lack of awareness is probably one of the biggest pitfalls, and self-awareness is one of the greatest gifts we each carry. Then toward the end, sum this up in what I call best practices, and then have an opportunity for us to ask questions, make comments. So my assumption, not a strong one, is that I'll probably talk for the first several minutes. However, if you really wish to make a comment, uh, maybe alert Kim in the chat room or simply start talking. I'm not sure how this works. Um, I think that's it. I think the next slide. Oh, I'm grateful for those of you who responded to two questions I put out, thanks to you, Kim, about what I like best about the board on which I serve, and then what I find challenging. My hunch is you're going to find these familiar on both counts. So I read everything, and truly I thank you for sending it in. I've kind of put similar ones together, and we'll quickly go through this. What I like best about boards seem to have fallen into four categories: relationships, focus, board leadership, and results. And these fall, I didn't rate these according to the most. However, I think the first one truly is the most. But what I like best about the board on which I serve, my fellow trustees. Several of you said that. You said it in different ways, but key words I pulled out from your comments were talented people. They come from the local community. It's a diverse group. They're people of dedication and passion. Among us at a board, we have the ability to probe with questions and to enter into honest and open exchange of differing ideas. One of you said, have an ability to enter into honest debate. And somebody else said we can do that with respect. Another best about the boards is that people bring a vast amount of experience. And it's that intersection of a variety of professional life experience. Maybe some of you are alums, but you bring that to the attention at the board table. I love this one. You bring a love of the school and a commitment to keep the school vibrant and steeped in mercy culture. That issue of or topic of mercy came up a few times. A few of you said, I learn a lot from others on the board. Somebody else said, we've been through a lot together, and I can see good results from that. One of you said, I've been introduced to fine folks on the board and in the school community. And finally, a comment was, we are a people with sincere and genuine commitment. In terms of what you like best about the board relative to focus, that you have the best interests of the school in mind, that you have a deep understanding of the school's mission and traditions. And not only the board, but each committee is committed to its task. And one of you said, I'm encouraged because the work we do is really important to the school. A couple of you addressed board leadership and truly appreciate. You tended to use board chair. I think one of you used executive committee, but that the board leadership keeps the board focused and keeps topics moving. Results, at least that's the word I put down. You've seen the school strengthened because of the board's efforts. You notice that board members have learned a lot about the school. And you also see that as a board member, you've not only gained new colleagues, but you've gained some new friends. I think that's a very positive way to walk into a board meeting, knowing that that's happening. Maybe in between these two, to simply say to all of you, I serve on 3 boards right now. One of them is a high school board. And at times throughout my presentation, I will say maybe a story or an example. And I want you to know not all of them are from the secondary school board on which I serve. Just so you know that, because you may know some of it, and I don't want you to get off the phone and say, oh my God, what a mess that school's in, and it's not the school, it's something else. So, but what some of you find challenging, I would say this is probably almost 100%. I find challenging the economic issues, especially as they interface with enrollment pressures. Financial decisions, including financial aid to students and compensation for faculty staff. Timing of board meetings themselves. I noticed a little bit of struggle, both the monthly meetings and the quarterly meetings. And you may take that back to your board maybe after this presentation. It's challenging as a board member or trustee to really commit to preparation and to reading the material ahead of time. I love this one. I think it's true of so many of us. I am growing in confidence as a new board member and truly trusting I have something to say and that I need to speak. This comes from an immediate example came to mind, and this is from my secondary board meeting. There's an alum on the board who's older than I, and she kept saying almost the entire first year, I know I really have nothing to say, but I just like being on the board. And people finally took her aside and say, you can no longer say that. You can only speak your truth. And she's really been excellent. Something, this did not come up too often, and yet every now and then it does come up for a board. A board member who found it very challenging when a faculty was divided in its allegiance to the administration. And yet she or he was heartened by the experience, expertise, and professionalism of the board in working through this. Another challenge on a board can be communication, especially between meetings. Another one, and I see this across all kinds of boards, identifying and recruiting new board members who have an expertise, who have an interest in the school, and a willingness and the time to serve. One of you, and I don't know where this is, but just being transparent, one of you said, I'm challenged by Mesa's proposed new policy to exclude current parents from the board. So that's just in transparency. Another challenge is lack of involvement on the part of some board members who don't exchange. Reminds me, again, this is not a secondary school experience, but I was at a board meeting, my first board meeting on another board, and I met a man I have known because of his business and all of that. He was so excited. Sister Mary, I am so happy I get to be on this board, and I'll see you every quarter. I never saw him. He never came. And maybe 2 out of 4 meetings a year, he might have been on a call part of the time. I found that very frustrating. So I would share that challenge of lack of involvement. Another challenge is the growing professionalism that is demanded of board members, trustees themselves. And another person said, I have found it challenging serving as the board chair. She said, I think it's a she, I'm not sure. It also happens to board members that every now and then feeling like we've been run over by the bus. It might be a parent bus or a faculty bus. And at times feeling like my full-time job is board chair or board member, especially at the time of administrative searches. And at those times, the challenge is one that is very stressful. So I just wanted to start this out with your words rather than mine. I myself resonated with just about every good thing and every challenge, not only from secondary board, but other boards on which I serve. So before we go any further, it sounds corny maybe to say you are special, but I really believe it. Not everybody is invited to serve on a board. And I like to think it is no accident that you or I have been invited at this particular time. And I hope when either a board chair, maybe another board member is kind of testing you out, feeling you out, or maybe the head of school principal is inviting you to serve, I hope you ask why. Because I think you will learn something of value you bring. And to recognize your expertise, your background, your experience. And yes, every meeting has an agenda, and some meetings have more reading than you would like to read, and it's all there in front of you. But please, please remember that you are there because of who you are, the expertise you bring, your background, and let that inform your participation, your contribution to the board. And this one, those of you who know me say, oh, this will be typical Mary Waskowiak, but I honestly believe it. You have been invited to the board at a particular time. You weren't invited 5 years ago. Maybe you were and you're still on the board. But at the time you were invited is the time that you need to be present. And I honestly believe, I'm not talking about being Catholic, but I really believe there's something about not only our professionalism, but our souls, that if we could bring both to service on the board, we're better for it, and so is the board and the school. And just don't take that lightly. I think it's very real. The reality we face today, you know, 2018, not the same reality even of 2017, but let alone 5 or 10 years ago. And to remember that for the most part, especially in the education field, our boards are a volunteer service opportunity. And boards are competing for the attention of expert people, experienced people who are also very busy. The staff support that's available to boards in different settings varies, depending on staff support that's available and on any agreements made. And I know at times that seems pressuring on both sides, on the side of staff support at the school, and then maybe on our side who really need assistance. And what I find is conversations help make that work. And I have appreciated the way I've been able to work out some assistance. It also takes time to develop a strong and effective board. I think you know this, but to say it again, anytime one person leaves the board or one person comes on the board, it's a new board. And how to acknowledge it, how to work with that, if it's one or two people coming on the board, asking them to say something about themselves as they come on. Maybe there's a little bio that can be sent out in preparation for the next board meeting. And when a person or persons leave the board, yes, there's often an exit interview with the board chair or executive committee or board chair and head of school, and that's a great opportunity. But somehow to be able to provide the entire board the opportunity to say thank you and goodbye. The other thing, and maybe you do this as a matter of fact, I have seen a variety of practices on the different boards I serve. But for a board chair or the executive committee to be tuned in to the board's need for development. An example I can give most recently is the secondary board I serve on. We do try to have a board retreat once a year. Now, what retreat means is even a mysterious word, so there's usually time at a board meeting to say, what does this mean? And it often means a time for the entire board to be together from about 9 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon, and to just have some warm time to chat in between, but to also pick a particular focus. For the board I'm serving on, it's just about time for us to look again at a strategic plan. So we invited the former superintendent of Catholic schools for San Francisco to be with us for the morning hours. So she was with us about 9:30 to noon, and kind of brought all of us up to speed on what does even a strategic plan mean, and why is it part of the board? How do you go about it? How do you evaluate it regularly, etc.? That was very helpful. At this time, we are pretty much a continuing board, and yet I think for one person, it was new. So it was good for that person to have time with all of us. I also say, finally, it takes time and thoughtfulness today I would add it takes time, thoughtfulness, confidence, and honesty to recognize the needs of a particular institution and its constituency. Um, we tend to use the word constituency. We use instead the word the school community. And we might say the school community, especially whatever part, and one of the parts could be the board. But it takes time, and I love it that at the end of a board meeting, there's always time to say, how was this time? And is there anything you want to say before we leave? Especially, is there anything we need to pay attention to? And often it becomes a time, it's not a long time, but it becomes a time for board members to say, here's an idea, maybe we could get onto a board agenda. And they submit it, and generally it's worked with. Just, you know this better than I, but not to take anything for granted. That the boards are made up of very generous and often very busy people. Yes, some of us might be retired. Some of us might be alums from the school itself, and that's the expertise we bring. However, even the most generous of retired people, as I listen to retired people, you know, they have their own rather busy agenda. So to just remember that we are busy people and we're asked on a regular basis to prepare and give the best of our wisdom and experience to a very important agenda for the life and the future of a school community. The second point here, our board members have their own needs for good orientation and clarity on how they can best contribute. Who will orient board members? And who's going to ask them what they need? I have to say, I have very strong feelings about this. After I finished leadership with Sisters of Mercy, I was invited to be on a board that was not one of our secondary school boards, so it was another board. I was asked to be on it, and I said, well, what about orientation? Oh, yes, Mary, that will happen. Mary, you don't need it. And I said, yes, I do. And I went to those board meetings. I was never oriented. And at one point, I wasn't on the top board. I was on a intermediary board, you might say. So the CEO and the chair of the top board, who was a Sister of Mercy and a friend of mine, came and reported on something, and I asked a question that was sincere. The CEO could not answer it. And so the CEO turned to the board chair. And of course, she could answer it beautifully. At the end of the meeting, she came up to me and she said, Mary, don't you ever do that again. And I said, I won't, but it speaks to the need for orientation. And I tell you, from that meeting to the next, in between those two meetings, there was a superb orientation. And what both the CEO and the Sister of Mercy said to me is, Mary, you know everything. You've been the president. No, I don't. Nor do you. You know, you may be a past head of school. You don't know everything. So just for each of us to be humble and for the leadership of the board and the leadership of the school to really think through orientation. Because what that orientation does is bring out the best in board members. So I say that because my third point here, I really believe board and committee members are often the hidden jewels in the storehouse of a school's mission and operations. And when I wrote that, and I still think of it, there's a man who has been invited to one of the committees of the secondary school I serve on, and I called him and he said, "Oh, Mary, yeah, I bring the experience you're looking for, but it's been a few years. My wife and I travel. She'd be a better board member." And I said, for some reason, your name keeps coming up. So he and I had breakfast. We talked about it. He said, "Well, I'll come. Okay, I'll come." He is superb. He is a hidden jewel. And it's a jewel that is no longer hidden. Everybody on that committee recognizes that without him, our committee is less full. If he's on vacation or whatever it is, he has called in from New Zealand because the committee has so engaged him that he missed a meeting. He said, "If you can do it at this time, I can be there and call in," and he did. So to recognize hidden jewels also brings out the best in the jewels. So pass that on to you. Some of this, and maybe let me give her credit right now. And Kim, I noticed I failed to put her name down at the very end of resources, but I will give Kim her information. There's a woman in the Philadelphia area, and my hunch is that several of you know her. Marisa Guerin is consultant, facilitator, very familiar with Mercy in its many dimensions, and familiar with both corporate and nonprofit world. She has some excellent work on best practices for a board. Some of this is taken from her, and some of this is taken from my own experience as a board member across a variety of boards. So I call these 3 essential elements for a successful board member in the Mercy system. So you'll see the first one is somehow to make Mercy a part of our everyday life and work. I have especially enjoyed being on boards with men who have said, "Sister Mary, I never thought I could become a Sister of Mercy, but I just about am." And he has loved it, the man I'm thinking about. I think this happens, but I don't want to take it for granted, to come to know and appreciate Mercy's founder, Catherine Macaulay. 1831, Dublin, Ireland. She was 51 years old. If any of you ever step foot on the country, the island of Ireland, get yourself to Dublin and to Baggot Street. You'd be more than welcome. Secondly, come to know the meaning of the term charism. I know several boards I'm on. Charisma, what do you call it? What's this mean? And I have noticed some leaders of boards, and sometimes this is the chair. This tends probably in our situation to fall back to Mesa and to the particular boards on which you serve, that the school leadership can make that practical. So it's not this kind of odd Greek word. Come to know the mission and mercy today and its key documents. I was just at a board meeting that actually referred to the Institute Chapter 2017 recommitment statement and went through its major components. I was very impressed. So I hope that is happening, because that, again, becomes part of the backdrop in which each of us is doing our work and each of our boards is doing our work. And then I always like to do this, First of all, who do you consider key sisters of mercy? And then what are their names and why are they key? Today, maybe I hold up and don't let me cry. She has certainly been of assistance, and Detroit, Farmington Hills would know Mary Kelly. Uh, Guyana knows Mary Kelly. Uh, Many. Sister Mary Kelly, excellent person with corporate documents, finance, extremely creative. She made creative financing a fine work of art. In a way, for me, she's the key sister of Mercy. But you know them. You know the founder of your high school. So I just encourage you how to make Mercy real at either each board agenda or at regular intervals. It's not that that becomes, the full board topic, but that you give it time and attention, because I believe it's a two-way street. Each one of us is on the boards because of the expertise we bring and the person that we are, that we bring. And likewise, even for the most dedicated Sister of Mercy, Associate of Mercy, likewise, every meeting we need to be impacted by mercy. Let's do these next two, and then maybe let me just take time to see if there's anything you want to say. So maybe, Kim, this is a heads up. The second essential element for me to be a successful board member is to be deeply familiar with the vision and mission of your institution. Could you pass the test on it? I would say I would be hard pressed to say the mission of the secondary institution I'm on. I could say they're by taglines. They're good taglines, and they invite and demonstrate the mission. But I have something to learn here. And once again, to let the vision and mission permeate the board and let it be the air we breathe. I find especially the mission of the school and maybe the tradition of the school comes into play at times of tension. And I've noticed it around enrollment and financial aid. Apparently, there's some statistic out there that nonprofit schools should give no more than about 30 to 33% in financial aid. And schools are giving anywhere from 40 to 60+%. And, people will say we have to change, we have to take paying students, and we do. And yet when you look at the mission, especially the mission of the institution, the mission of Mercy, our founder, what do? So I just put that out. And then to remember, and because at times, at least in San Francisco, this has been a source of tension, to become familiar and to remember that we are a Catholic institution in a given diocese or archdiocese. So, for example, could each one of us name the leader, the archbishop or bishop or cardinal of our diocese? Maybe other bishops or superintendent of schools. I say that because communication with them in neutral time is often a very wise thing. A board chair to go with the head of school and say, just want to meet you. Just want you to know we're here. I say this because it was nationally public. 3 or 4 years ago, our archdiocese got very heavy on the mandate around Catholic teachers, especially in teaching religion and in other key elements. And I don't remember now if it was also something around gay, lesbian teachers. It was a huge backlash in our diocese. Archdiocesan schools hit more strongly. The religious, congregationally sponsored schools were still hit. A lot of tension, a lot of public meetings. I went to one of the public meetings. I was very touched by parents, by teachers, by students. Students who I remember this one young man saying, I'm a gay man. I want to be able to talk about this because you have to form me in who I am. Very touching. And I would say our leadership at the archdiocesan level um, has been positively affected by that. The other point I'd add in here, um, you as especially board chairs, executive committees, head of school, MESA leadership. I also have noticed right now we're still in community connection. Although with MESA now being MESA and accountable to the Institute leadership team, however that will work, to have the presence of Sister of Mercy leadership makes a huge difference. If you don't mind me taking a couple of minutes to give this example, and again, this is a public one, so I'm not speaking of confidence. A couple years ago, at an already stressful time on the board on which I serve, one of the teachers informed school leadership that they were making the transition in gender identity, and it had already begun. So it was being talked about because we are at the time we were West Midwest accountable. Laura Reichs, the president of the West Midwest community, educated herself very deeply and then asked for a meeting with the Archbishop. She also asked me as a former leader to be present, mainly to be present as a listener and jumping in if necessary, and I think I did it once. She was superb, superb. And she said to him, Archbishop, we are set to share this with the board tonight. We are going to tell faculty tomorrow, and we're telling students tomorrow afternoon. If you say no, we will not go forward. You are the first ones we're telling. So he was quiet for a couple of minutes. Then he said, I will not stop you. This was certainly locally an item of major interest and nationally. And it worked. It worked beautifully. And I just say that I think MESA leadership and you and your own institutions will know when, who needs to step up to the plate. But I just consider that we are Mercy and Catholic. This one I don't think I need to spend a lot of time with. You can look at this slide yourselves later. But be aware that every school, every institution, every board has a life cycle. You know, often the beginnings are wonderful, they're quite public, a lot of energy, and then they move into a very day-to-day, seemingly flat time. Then they move into what I call intersection times. Pretty rough right now. You know, maybe a major issue has come forward. What do you do at those tough times? You know, what do you do when it's time to maybe call the question? What's the future here? What options are before us? Not to be afraid of those questions. And again, for me, it comes back to board members, leadership, both in the school setting, in the MESA setting. How do you trust your own, might be your own intuition, your own spirit nudgings? How do you trust that, and then how do you bring it forward? Because sometimes somebody has to raise a difficult issue, and how do you do it? And I put it in this context of the life cycle of a school system and maybe the life cycle of a board. Um, Again, if there are more questions or comments, we can talk about that. And I think I'm going to stop here because I said I'll stop after the third essential element, and I didn't. So Kim, I just want to check with you. Is there any need for a question response time now or keep going?
I would put it out there just to see if anyone has a question at this point, and then we can continue.
Okay.
Does anyone have a question of Sister Mary? Or a comment on anything that she has said to this point?
Well, we'll have time at the end, and I say this both affectionately and facetiously. I know it's easy to say, oh, I'll just keep listening and I'm taking care of other business for the day. So I hope you're getting enough out of this. I hope this is helpful. So, life cycle of the school. Also, you might do the 50 of you that will be on today's call or Wednesday's call. Maybe step back before your next board meeting and just think about the board you're on. Even what's the size of your board? Small? Is it newly formed? What kind of a job do you think your board is doing? Are there places that maybe your board could be strengthened? Maybe you could grow in size. Again, this is my experience on this is my experience from, well, actually all three boards I serve on ask this question. All three boards I serve on are moderately sized. But I do hear the question, are we too small? Are we too small for the work that needs to be done? And do we have the expertise we need? Those are really good questions. And they're good questions for a full board to consider, at least for a given amount of time. Maybe it doesn't need huge number of minutes or hours, but just to reflect on the size of your board and how it's helping or not helping you accomplish your purpose. The number 2 one, are you a small board, maybe growing past the founder stage? That period of just great commitment, great energy, and entering into conflict. Conflict is good if it can be dealt with above board and not kept under board or under the table or talked about in small groups. So just look at that. Let's look at number 3, a moderately sized board, and maybe the school is quite established. It's good. Your board is highly effective. I could hear the head of school saying, don't change anybody. Let's just keep all of you on. Well, that's not possible. Every board does need new life, new energy. But maybe a good topic for your board is to take a look at the long-term sustainability of the institution and hopefully, of course, the sustainability of your board, and talk about succession planning before it has to happen next week. Um, don't let that stay in a closet. Let it come forward. And you may have the discussion, and some people will say, frankly, it's too soon. And you could stop it right then and there, but at least it has some time. It has had time on at the boardroom, at the board table. Again, you might be a large board, and you might say, well, what small, medium, and large size board? You might want to look at that. It's going to be in relationship to maybe the size of your school, maybe the history of the size of the board you've been on. Um, you go way back to the founding of the school. I'm in Burlingame, and the school up the hill opened in 1931. And I don't even think there was such a word as a board, but it was probably the superior general and her council using old language. That was the board. But as it's grown, what have been the needs? And then how you as a board, for the sake of the school, not for your own sake, but how can you as a board move from good to great in both your performance as a board and in the legacy you want to leave the school as a particular board member or maybe as a full board? You know, I think that again could be a good topic, maybe even for a board retreat, a day, not the full day necessarily, but maybe legacy. And then large boards, you know, um, I dare say this is, maybe I won't mention the name. I was going to mention one of the schools because you do have a very strong, successful reputation. And I know if I said the name of the city, probably within 5 sentences, the name of the high school would come up because of the impact that school has on the city. But even the best of boards have to be careful, and the best of institutions have to be careful that we're not living on past success, past grandeur. We've kind of lost our edge. I think mercy is its best in every arena if we're standing at the edge. Yes, we can look back, but we can see the risks in front of us. To quote Marie Chin, Marie Chin used to say, we stand at that edge ready to jump, not knowing if we're going to fall to the bottom or fly, but we're willing to stand at the edge. So I leave that to you. I, again, don't know any of the institutions. I know your names. Let's say that's all I know. But at some point, a board might have to help an institution look at its completion, or its merger, or its rejuvenation, or a strategy or strategies that will bring that institution to where it needs to be. And maybe no matter what the size of a board, to not get frozen in our success, or to not say, we're a board that has never had any major influence on the school, but we'll keep meeting. Don't let yourself stay there. Speak up. Be willing to be vulnerable, to speak your truth with a growing confidence.
Sister Mary, I just wanted to give you a time check. It's close to 12, so we have about 32 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kim, and that's good. I hope I can do the next part in 15 and then give us time.
Great.
This goes to a board's core function, not what I call the essential elements, which maybe are more large picture. But if you are a member of a board, the board on which you serve, your duties are, and I think these are Marisa Guerin's words, or titles more than mine. We have the duty of care for the institution on whose board we serve. And the duty of care, and we demonstrate that by showing up. It's our attendance, not school attendance, it's ours. About being well informed, to accept the delegation of responsibilities given to us, and to be thorough and make sure that any decisions the board makes are well documented. I am always grateful I have not been selected to be a board secretary, because that is such an influential role. Duty of loyalty, no conflict of interest, full disclosure. I have sat at board meetings on other boards where somebody would say, I just want to say, given this topic, I want you to know I'm doing this. If you consider it a conflict of interest, I will leave the room. Generally, that has not happened. I was on a board, and I feel like the board member may have been taken by her organization. Every year we would, like the schools, we sign a no conflict of interest document, and she signed it in all good faith. Somehow she was connected to an organization that if the board made certain decisions and the institution went forward with those institutions, her organization would benefit. She did not realize that. The board did not. The leadership of the institution did not. And we went forward. Pretty quickly, we discovered what was going on. She had to resign. It was an unfortunate time and a publicly embarrassing one for the board member. So, duty of loyalty is serious. And this duty of obedience, how to further the mission, how to make real foundational documents, how to comply with the laws of a given state, the bylaws of our institution, and however we are connected to the bylaws of MESA. How to ensure the use of assets for mission, financial assets and human assets. Duty of confidentiality. I was just at a meeting recently, and the person said, remember, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, and we were sitting in a different city altogether. I think we all know what that means. I have to say, I have seen that, maybe my language would be, I have seen the institution maybe threatened by that, with very excellent board members who have felt it their duty to report to a higher authority. That has been challenging. So I think duty of care, duty of loyalty, duty of obedience, duty of confidentiality are truly obligations that have some legality around them that need to be taken quite seriously. Also, our fiduciary responsibilities, always asking in the best interest of the mission of the school. Again, these come from Marisa Guerin, and I just like her questions. As a board member, I want to hold these kinds of interests, these questions in my pocket. That as we look at various topics on a board agenda, we keep in mind, maybe only for ourselves, but at times we may need to bring the question to the table. What could go wrong in our moving forward? How to take risks, how to manage risk as you see, how to look at the various topics that are there. I notice on the various boards I've served, usually one or two people carry this very well and are very good at asking those questions. I want to know what this really means, I've heard, or what could go wrong. And then our strategic responsibility. Yes, we're responsible for the big picture, not the operations. But to really be able to say, what is the plan? How do we see that? What's our board long-range plan? What's our board strategy? But what's the schools? What are the key performance reviews that minimally an executive committee must perform? What's our commitment, our relationship to the friend raising in the school? It's probably some of you, but I have enjoyed the humility some board members bring, saying, I know I'm here because I'm direct access to so and so, and it would be a major source of money. And I'm here for that. I will see what I can do, and I'm going to be a full board member. So that strategic role we play, and the generative role we play. Yes, we go to board meetings. Yes, we follow an agenda that has generally a here and now reality. But to be able to look at that here and now reality and the decision asked of us, and then maybe to ourselves, say to ourselves, but maybe say to the whole board, what's the next right move? I have to say, this slide and the one before it, I'm happy to give Marisa Guerin credit for it. I think they're really worth some reflection time, and maybe you could see what part of it you want to make real for yourself. And then some of these next few slides might appear repetitive, but to not ignore them. Our core responsibilities as board members: to assure that the organization, the school, maintains its institutional integrity, advances its mission, and that the board focuses on the school's most important activities. We don't have to be in the weeds, but we have to be able to see the landscape. Be familiar with the institution's bylaws in addition to its mission and vision. I really appreciate the addition in the last few years of a certain attorney and a certain board member who has a lot of educational system experience, who have said, in light of MESA, this is an excellent time to look at our bylaws. And that's been very educative for the entire board. Also, our responsibility to set strategic direction and goals, to review policies that belong to the board. Not all policies belong to the board. That's why at a recent board retreat, for us to have spent time with an outsider who is familiar with how a school institution and how a board can set strategy and strategic direction. Safeguard the financial soundness and integrity of the school, its adequacy of resources. I find the board very good at that. I find some of that, yes, falls to executive committee. Some of it falls to finance committee. And some of it, can't remember what our board calls it. It's kind of a planning committee, so that there's real integrity with the high school, the whatever level education it is, and MESA, for the success of both the institution and MESA's ongoing success. That we review and approve budgets, audits, certain reports, and pay attention to certain controls. Now, some of this, I have not studied deeply the MESA bylaws and policies. Some of this is within the board of the institution itself, Some of it is relative to Mesa. Again, our role, we might not be professional fundraisers or finance people, but to really work toward a stable and diverse funding base so that the school can achieve its goals, primarily the education of young people. And that we recognize, yes, because of our membership on the board, somehow we are related to the future of the school and its funding, its financial success. Again, see that the school is well led, managed soundly, have a role in the hiring and evaluation of the chief administrator of the school, personnel policies. Make sure that the board is well constituted and it has what it needs and it's prepared to carry out its duties. That seems to be a very important one. And some of this is repetitive. Assure recruitment, turnover, pay attention to committee membership. Committee members do not have to be board members. Again, my very strong emphasis that part of what a board needs is board development. Part of what board members need is good orientation. Make sure that a board member and a board can advance our institution's work and be credible, and that we ourselves can be credible members of a board and part of the school community. That we can act as good ambassadors and advocates. Every now and then somebody will come up to me, sometimes Sister of Mercy, sometimes layperson, and say, I hear you belong to such and such board. And I say, yes. Well, this is what I've heard. Is it true? And I'm able to engage them and usually refer them to somebody. Part of my advocacy role. Again, this is repetitive. See the forest, not the trees, let alone the rocks on the pathway. Keep our vision big. Be unafraid to ask the tough questions. Maybe begin to say, what are the next right questions that need to be asked? Be able to provide stability over the long haul. Help somehow be a support during difficult times, maybe when difficult decisions need to be made. I love this one. Just be aware of the traps each one of us can fall into. Our own ego, keep our ego in place. That person I talked about in the beginning who said, I'm so happy to be on this board. It was a board that if your name was connected to it, it carried some, prestige. That person never showed up. Just because your name is there, don't let that be all that's there. Be there. Be worthy of the trust placed in your hands. I think confidentiality is so important. I have seen it be really harmful and detrimental in an institution and organization setting beyond a secondary or elementary middle school. Be really honest on this conflict of interest, even potential. Test it out. Just remember, we're at the strategic level, we're at the forest level, we've heard 20,000 feet level, not the day-to-day operations. Again, all of this, really ask why you've been invited so that you can know why you're wanted, and you might be able to say, I'm happy to serve that, but really say, I have more than just that. Live up to your calling, because your calling is deeper than just your expertise. Be willing to be a learner. Have courage. Walk your talk. I really liked or a couple of you who said, I want to grow in confidence. Really grow in humble confidence. Keep the issues on the table, not under the table. and not just with a few people you meet in the parking lot before or after a meeting. I don't find this generally a problem with boards. I tend to find it a problem with executive hired leadership in various organizations. But when your board term is up and cannot be renewed, say thank you and goodbye, and don't hang on. Time for new blood. So show up, be prepared, take responsibility, and look to the future. I love those. I think if you remember nothing else on this, do that. Show up, be prepared, be responsible, look to the future. Okay,